Let's see if this microphone's working. Is that working now? Yes. Good. Because I've got things to hold. Right, sorry, that was a bit of a long passage, wasn't it? Passage. I just felt really inspired by the whole of Colossians 3. And I thought, well, we need to know why we're serving God in the workplace, don't we? So, apologies. And I'm going to skate over quite a lot of chapter 3, and then particularly focus in on the bit at the end, which applies to work. But just to have a quick introduction, why have I been asked to do this talk? Well, I've got a few hats that I wear. I'm a mum of 3 boys. They're now quite large. I'm a part-time doctor. I'm a dog walker. That is for our dog. And I also happen to be married to the vicar here. So I've got 3 different roles which I juggle. So in my paid work, I work as an eye specialist. It's quite a nice daytime medical job, so therefore it's highly competitive. So that's over the years made it quite hard to tie in where I work with where Dan works. So for a while I tried GP training when we were in Manchester, and I was struggling to get on the next step up the career ladder with ophthalmology. We had Josh whilst I was still a GP registrar. And I tried going back to work part-time at that point, but I just really struggled leaving him, and just realised I'd always had a longing to be a stay-at-home mum. My mum had done that for us. And so I actually gave up work after 3 months of going back to it, and I then spent 7 years at home as a full-time mum. We had 3 boys who were very lively. It was crazy. But I had some great opportunities with friends. Amidst all that craziness and chaos, I was able to witness to some other mums. I even saw a couple come to faith. That was when we were living in Bristol. And then God called us here in 2012. And then what followed was quite a confusing time for me. My attempts to witness to friends here just seemed to fall flat. And then, to my surprise, God called me back into the workplace through meeting a couple of Christian ophthalmologists. And then I went back into work. Another wonderful but rather confusing time followed, where I was rediscovering who I was. I wasn't just a mum of 3 boys anymore. I was doing other things. I've slowly built up my hours, and I've actually just submitted my portfolio to see if I can qualify to become a consultant, aged 50. Just a few years after a lot of my colleagues. So, let's just have a quick look at Colossians 3. I'm just going to paint a broad picture. So Paul starts by talking about this immense change that's happened in us since we started believing in Jesus. We've gone from being spiritually dead to being spiritually alive. Our old self has died with Christ on the cross. So that means we no longer belong to ourselves, but we belong to Christ. So Jesus is now our master. We're not in charge of our own lives anymore. God is our boss, not our work boss. He's not in charge, or she's not in charge. God is in charge. And also our bank balance isn't in charge of us, or our fitness app, whatever it is that seems to be controlling our lives. Jesus is to rule in our hearts now. He is our boss. And we're to set our heart on things above now, not on earthly things. So things that are important to God, such as showing love, kindness, humility, forgiveness. This is now our way of life. It's our new wardrobe. We're to wear these things as our heart wardrobe. The old clothes no longer fit us or suit us. We're to get rid of pride, greed, anger, rage, hateful thoughts, and words about people. I should have said, actually, do open the Bible on your phones if you have it. Sorry, I meant to say that at the beginning. John and Mercy can come round with some Bibles. I had a note to say that and I forgot to say it. Just because I'm going through quite a lot, I'm only going to pick out the occasional verse. But just so you can sort of see where I'm going. So that was verse 3 in Colossians 3. So if you want a Bible, just stick your hand up and Mercy will bring one round to you. We're looking at page 1184 in the church Bibles, but do get it up on an app in your phone as well. So, we're to yield our whole lives to Jesus in gratitude to him laying down his life for us on the cross. We're not trying to earn his love, but we're giving up our lives in response to his wonderful, never-ending, unconditional love. And we're particularly thinking about work this morning, so the obvious application here is that we're to yield our work lives, whether they're paid or unpaid, to Jesus. So, like I've just said, verse 12, compassion, kindness, humility, and gentleness. And there's some really good tips. It's worth taking this home and just reading chapter 3 by yourself. There's some really good tips on how to grow in this godly character here. We call it growing in spiritual fruit, for those who aren't familiar with that. Now, sometimes the Holy Spirit will zap us with a bit of extra patience or a bit of extra love for a difficult person, but often actually the way he works is over months and years as we spend more time with Jesus, learning from him, learning from other Christians, learning to be thankful, spending time worshipping God and listening to God. Over time, we get transformed into his likeness. And those of us who've tried this will know that if you just try to do it in your own strength, you turn over a new leaf, you go into whatever situation you're in with good intentions, you'll soon end up on your knees with frustration. We need the help of God. I can tell that recently at work, I'm being less patient with some of my colleagues due to something that happened a year ago. And I've tried praying about it with friends, but I'm finding it's still an issue. So I'm actually in the process of seeking out a Christian counsellor to help me work through that thing that happened. So sometimes we do need to do some hard work to let God into those difficult parts of our lives and allow him to mould us into something more beautiful. If we feel like we're overreacting to certain situations, often that's because there's something in there that God needs to heal. Now then, I'm going to get confused now about my order. Okay, so we're going to jump forward now and look at verse 21. I'm not going to look at the bit on wives and husbands, sorry. This is a sermon about work. If you want to know more about that, ask Dan maybe. No, you can come and ask me about that if you want. I have looked into that, but I'm not going to try and cover it now. So verse 21 says, let's say parents rather than fathers, like it says in the Pew Bible. Parents, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Now, parenting, of course, is a heck of a lot of work, so we definitely need to talk about parenting just briefly. The ESV translates it as, do not provoke your children. I really like the Message version, which says, don't be too hard on your children, or you'll crush their spirits. I think that's quite a helpful way to think of it. And the passage we've just read, Colossians 3, verse 12, tells us to be clothed with compassion. And I think that's really important as parents. When our children fail, we are to correct them and discipline them, not just let them get away with it, but we're to do so with the clothing we've been given from Jesus. So gentleness, compassion, humility, and above all, love. Now that's a really high demand on us as parents, and we will often fail too. I did frequently, I still do. But thankfully God wrote this verse, and he's our Heavenly Father. And he's not too hard on us. He also treats us with compassion. So let's not be too hard on ourselves as parents either when we mess up, because we will mess up frequently, every day, and we will need forgiveness from God. We will need to forgive ourselves, and we may need to say sorry to our children at times as well. So let's move on to verse 22 in this section, which we're going to treat as a section about work. Now, there's no escaping, this is a really difficult verse. I was given this one to preach on and thought, help. So Paul was telling slaves to obey their masters. He's not railing against the injustice of slavery. He's not telling slaves to escape if they can or to fight for freedom. So that's really hard, isn't it? Why is this in the Bible? Now, elsewhere in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul does advise slaves to gain their freedom if they can. Okay? But slavery is also seemingly sanctioned by God in the Old Testament. But that's for the nation of Israel, and it's actually very different to what we would think of as slavery. So in the Old Testament, the description of slavery is for those who've fallen into debt, And it's a way of them having work and lodgings to pay back their debt until they can regain their freedom. So although God seems to be sanctioning slavery there, it's not what we would think of as slavery. Okay. Again, just like I'm not going to talk about husbands and wives, I'm not going to get into slavery today, sorry. But we're going to use this to think about serving in the workplace. So we're going to look at how to be a worker who glorifies God. Another translation does translate it as servants, obey your masters, but the original is talking about slaves. But let's take what we can from these verses and apply them to our work situation. Those of us who have a boss or a supervisor, let's remember that whatever we do, we're working for God, not for that human boss, nor for ourselves. And for some of us, that means we should work harder and be more diligent, even when nobody is watching. We don't slack off. It can also be a way to find joy and purpose in a job that we hate, knowing that it matters to God what we do, and it does have eternal significance. It will likely mean that we end up being seen as honest and trustworthy by others. But even if no one else sees it, God sees it, and he rejoices in us. For others of us, having a boss will actually mean we need to work less and lose some of our perfectionism. We will say no at times to our earthly boss, or to the request to do one more job that might be good for our bank balance but bad for our health or our relationships, or our relationship with God. Now, I appreciate some of us are finding it hard to make ends meet, to pay rent and feed the family. If that's you, then obviously you need to pray about the right response to how much work you do. But please do also consider coming and talking to my husband Dan about the church care fund, which is there for us to share what we have with each other. We are a church family, and some of us have more than we need, some of us don't have enough. So please don't be too proud to ask for that. But for some of us, the extra job we say yes to will be to pay for a luxury, such as a new car or a nicer holiday. But just ask God before you say yes, whether your family would prefer that you were actually home on time that evening, rather than getting a slightly bigger car. I'd also like to slam the Protestant work ethic here. We were talking about this a few weeks ago after church. God asks us to work with him, not to work harder to please him. It's really important to be clear on that. One particular busy patch for me, I was regularly going down to Bournemouth a day a week. And I had about half an hour. I think I was working for some exams at the time. And I prayed, like, Lord, what shall I do with this half hour I've got before my train home is due? And I really clearly heard him say, go and sit on the beach for half an hour and enjoy the view. And I had the most glorious half hour sat with God on the beach. It was a beautiful sunny day. And it was just wonderful in the middle of this really heavy, busy time. And I realised that my work ethic had been influenced by a line in the famous Rudyard Kipling poem, which is simply called If. I don't know if anyone knows that. I'd actually recited it for my English GCSE, so I've always known it quite well. This particular line, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. So I just had this in my head, particularly as a mum of small children. If I ever had a moment to myself, what can I do with that time? There was always something I had to be doing with that time. And I found it hard to stop and rest. But the final lines are quite telling. It then goes on to say, if you can do all these things, yours is the world, or yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. He'd written it for his son. But actually, that's not very biblical, is it? In fact, it directly contradicts the Bible. Mark 8, verse 36 says, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? So if we work all the hours God sends, we can lose sight of God. And actually, sometimes the thing God commands us to do is to stop and rest and remember it doesn't all depend on us. It depends on him. So sorry, I've cancelled Rudyard Kipling. So, knowing God as our boss can bring a new freedom and joy to our lives. God is already pleased with us. Pleasing our earthly boss is still important, but it's less important. We can have a day off each week and not check our emails. We can stick to godly ethics and not compromise because we're worried about losing our reputation or our job. So I'm just going to skip into 4 verse 1, which was the final verse that Jill read, and then I'm going to go back to Colossians 3, sorry. Sorry if it's a bit muddly. But basically, this line, again, it's talking about masters and slaves. But let's just apply that to if we've got anyone who we've got authority over. Okay. So we're to remember that we have a master in heaven who's kind and considerate to us. So let's do the same for those serving us. That was why I wanted to mention about Gareth talking about this flock that he has. So, but not many of us are in a position where we are supervising others. All of us, though, are served by others at times, aren't we? In the supermarket, in a cafe, when we go and have coffee after church. We're all served by other people at times, or a carer coming to look after our bodily needs. Let's be kind and considerate to those serving us, and let's not be quick to judge if they seem rude or incompetent. We don't know their situation, but God does. Someone in the congregation had a word last week about the good we can do by encouraging people that we work with or people that serve us. Can we find something specific that they do well that we can encourage them in? It makes a world of difference to the atmosphere in a place if people are noticed for the good they do and not just hauled up on their mistakes. So, I did say I was going to jump back a bit, sorry. I just really want to home in on this verse, verse 17. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. So whatever you do. And I've been really looking forward to sharing a couple of stories that have been buzzing around in my head as I've been listening to the previous sermons on work. The first is about the lovely Anne Williams, who some of you will remember. She spent the last few weeks of her life in hospital, unable to walk. Now, one night, another member of our church ended up in hospital as an emergency. She was feeling extremely anxious. But who should they end up next to but Anne? And they reported that Anne was just so lovely and cheerful, even though she'd really had a dreadful ordeal, and was a real blessing to her in Anne's weakest moment. Another story is from Jackie, who for the second time round was recovering from major surgery for bowel cancer. Unable to walk as well, just in bed. But she was placed next to a really difficult lady who was giving the staff a hard time. This lady was really struggling with her recovery from surgery and getting used to having a stoma bag. Now, Jackie had already been through that after her first operation and was able to beautifully minister to this lady and saw a great change in the lady as a result. So whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. Even if we feel like we can't serve, we can pray and we can listen and we can smile and encourage. So, it's one of my favourite verses. So just want to think about the place work has in our lives. So it's where we serve God. If work has too high a place in our value system, then status becomes too important. If an ethical dilemma comes along, we don't want to risk our status, we're more likely to compromise, and we don't want to put our reputation on the line for what we know we should do. And we also don't want to admit it when we make a mistake. We might use backhanded methods to climb the career ladder. Our career will come before our family, but we'll justify it saying, oh, we're doing it so that we can earn more money for them. But what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Now, even if our work is full-time Christian work, or we do our job and then we're spending loads of time serving in the church, if we don't have time to pray, though, because we're so busy, then we have to cut something out. I just want to talk a bit about Jesus and work. I don't know how we're doing for time. Lena, are we okay? I've been reading through Mark's Gospel at the moment, just in a new, fresh way. It's been great, actually. Asking Jesus, what were you feeling in that situation, in each moment? because I've suddenly stupidly just realised that the person who it's talking about is right next to me as I'm reading. Maybe you've always known that, but it just suddenly came as a fresh revelation to me. So I've been saying to him, what were you feeling when you were in this situation? And I came to Mark chapter 6, and Jesus starts preaching in his hometown. And they'd heard of his miracles, and they hear his teaching. He comes and teaches in the synagogue. But for some reason, they're completely outraged by him, and they reject him. So why? Why did they reject him? So I wonder if it's because he'd never shown an inkling of his power when he was growing up. He was a nice guy. I'm sure he was a really nice guy. Hopefully he was a really good carpenter, but actually maybe he was just an average carpenter. You ever thought about that? And he probably wasn't 6 foot tall and good looking either. Because it says in Isaiah 53 that there was nothing in his appearance to draw us to him. He wasn't like the guy in the film. I reckon he'd never used any of his supernatural powers until he started his ministry, age 30. So no wonder they were so shocked, and their first reaction was anger. So I was asking God why. Why were they so angry? And I think I heard God say that actually it was because he'd never helped them out when he was growing up. He held these miraculous powers at his disposal, and he'd never helped them out with them. Why hadn't he healed so-and-so when they were at death's door? Maybe why hadn't he even healed his earthly father, who we think probably died in his childhood? So how hard that must have been for Jesus, and how hard it must have been for him to resist the temptation to make life just that bit more entertaining when he was growing up, just that bit easier. He put up with regular, mundane, hard, smelly, boring, wonderful at times, but very ordinary life until he was around 30. Jesus understands hard work, blisters, aching limbs, meeting deadlines, uncertainty of income, dishonest traders, providing for a family, paying unfair taxes. He knows what it's like. He knows our lives. So Colossians 3, chapter 4, the Message translates it as, be content with obscurity like Christ. I think that's a real challenge. So let's just go on to talk about humility for a moment. What does humility look like? It doesn't look like the person receiving an Oscar who says, I'm really humbled to receive this Oscar. That really grates on me because I think, no, you're not. You're honoured. You're not humbled. And I just don't get where they get that word from. Humility looks like Jesus, who is content with obscurity. And one of my favourite memories here at St. James is not an amazing sermon or an amazing carol service. It was being down on my knees somewhere around here, scrubbing the floor after a children's event. And I looked up, and 2 other people were doing the same. And just for a moment, I realised that one of them happened to be an eminent surgeon. That wasn't me. And another one was a university professor. And there we were, just down on our knees, scrubbing away at the floor. No egos whatsoever. And I just loved that picture of church. I thought, yes, this is what church is about. And of course, we mustn't do things for show just when others are watching, because then pride sneaks in and it spoils what we've done and we puff up with self-righteousness. Nor must we surreptitiously let others know what we've done so that we receive credit. That's always a temptation. Let's be the one that secretly washes the dirty cups in the sink at work that no one else does it. And we don't need to tell anyone we've done it. Let's try and do it when no one else is around. Let's be the one who empties the bins in our shared house because no one else wants to do it because the bin is so disgusting. Let's worship God by secretly doing these things. And let's know his delight and his joy as we stoop low and remember that our God is the one that washes people's feet. Personally, I remember Jesus each time I'm at work and I have people in a wheelchair and they're transferring, I get them back, and I lift their feet back onto the bottom of the wheelchair. And just every time I do that, I'm reminded of Jesus. And I'm reminded that I'm serving that person. And let's also be the colleague who admits and apologises for our mistakes. We're not going to be perfect. Only Jesus could do that. But we can be the one that says sorry. So, I didn't go on to chapter 4, I was given that originally, but just a quick word about prayer. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. So I think we often think about praying for our colleagues to become Christians or whoever we're meeting in the community. And we might ask for opportunities to witness to them. But a penny dropped for me 2 or 3 years ago when I was just feeling very frustrated with our lack of equipment and funding at work, working in the NHS. And I was out for a walk in the forest, and I just suddenly started crying out to God for this situation, and that he would move this mountain of lack of funding and would provide. And strangely enough, it actually worked. After 10 years of no new equipment in our department, I felt this real passion and drive from God to take on this drive of trying to get new kit, even though I'm not officially in leadership in my job role at the moment. And we've now been blessed with new kit that we probably needed 10 years ago. And so just be challenged to think, Lord, like Gareth was saying, I'm going into this difficult meeting. Lord, give me the words to say. I'm really encouraged by Daniel in the Old Testament, having that wisdom from God in that secular situation, to know perhaps the right candidate to appoint for interview, but not just here at church, at work as well. Let's be praying about all these things. Let's be praying for every decision we make. Okay. So, that's all from me. I could have gone on for even longer. That was the shortened version. That's a bit of a busy slide, like they say. But I just thought I'd put up some of the key verses or points. And I just want you to spend a couple of minutes and just pray about those and just ask God, okay, which one is for me today? Or it might be something else. But just spend a bit of time praying about that now and ask God what it is he wants to change in you.